After repeatedly overextending into a solid steel wall of spiky autocannons over and over again, the Screaming Ravens have finally managed to secure a victory against their arch nemesis, the Chaos Knights. I haven't had a huge amount of success against Steve and his Titanic terrors in the past, and whilst I'd love to say that I improved or that my tactical acumen was the reason I was victorious this time, I have to admit that a lot of it came down to a huge amount of luck in one of the most ridiculous series of events I've ever been a part of. Luck invariably plays a part in every game of Warhammer 40k due to the fact that the game uses dice. We've all been in situations where we have had or have seen our opponent have some absolutely heinous dice luck, and I invite you to leave your stories in the comments below in solidarity of our shared misfortune, and to cynically pump up the engagement rate for the algorithm. In my first and only game of Age of Sigmar in 3rd edition, I managed to go the entire first round without rolling a single die higher than a 3. I always seem to find a way to only roll 1s for my 2-up saves, and it's a universal fact that any 1 that is command point rerolled will always be a 1. Anyone who tells you that they've rerolled a 1 into something that's actually useful is lying to you to get you to waste your precious command points. Don't believe their lies. But luck isn't just about dice, although that is the most obvious source of it. The game also uses random card draw for missions and deployments, which can be good or bad depending on the army and matchup, and most people use the random secondary deck if they're not cowards, which can also play a big part in swaying the game. In a tournament setting, even the actual matchups themselves can cause a lucky player to rank higher than another if they got good matchups for their army or list. Luck can even be about the mistakes or choices made in a game by you or your opponent. Maybe you once got lucky that your opponent missed a good opportunity or moved wrong or forgot a rule that's a bit too late to take back, or any number of small decisions that snowballed into situations that are more favorable. Maybe even a huge mistake that you made could have led to a more beneficial outcome in the long run without you even being aware of it. Foreshadowing is a literary device, and realistically, luck balances out across a large enough sample size, and the better players of the game are generally the ones that can make the best decisions consistently and bring the best lists that are more likely to handle any opponent. Bad players like me will instead go as far as trying to use a game plan that specifically requires going first, a 50-50 coin flip essentially at the start of the game. Something completely daft like plonking a Storm Raven on the table which can't be hidden behind anything because it's too big, but goddamn is it cool. And if I do go first, I'll have free reign to charge right into your face, guns blazing with my army that only benefits from the detachment rule when far away. The best players will probably do something else. That's why you end up seeing the same names at the top of the rankings over and over in these big tournaments. Players like Archon Skari, for example, the best Drukhari player in the world, who for some reason won't stop playing Drukhari. God damn it, Skari, what are you doing? Stop making GW nerf Drukhari!
The fact is, you've been making us all look bad.
So let's actually get into this report and walking you through what happened in this game and what is possibly the wildest series of lucky blunders I've ever seen. First of all, before you jump down our throats in the comments, the terrain does look a little sparse from this screenshot. The footprints for some of these pieces are a bit bigger than the actual terrain looks because of the weird shapes with what we had to work with, but overall it was not actually that bad. Perhaps the flanks here are a little bit bare, but we were also practicing for the Tabletop Tactics tournament we have coming up, which uses less standard competitive terrain setups and more thematic and beautifully presented ones, so we went with a bit of a lighter terrain setup based on our previous experience. Deployment here was fairly standard. Steve likes to put a few of his dogs in the strategic reserves, and I have a ton of deep strikes in my standard melted death bomb in the Storm Raven. So the number of units on the board on both sides is pretty low. My list uses the Vanguard Spearhead detachment, which allows me to have a Judicia with the Blade driven deep, leading a 3-man squad of Blade Guard veterans. They gain the infiltrate keyword, which I use to get them into this ruin to try and do a bit of move blocking or to try and slow down anything that might come towards them, giving me more time to set up my key units. Steve deployed his Abominant here to deal with those Blade Guards, to which I responded by placing my Devastated Centurions here. If I get the first turn, I'm quids in, but if I don't, that may be a slight issue, especially now with less ways to protect them due to the nerf Armor of Contempt. However, lucky break number 1. I got the first turn. Turn 1's command phase is fairly inconsequential to the story. I can't remember what secondaries I got, and I end up only scoring 4 points on them. I declare Oath of Moment on the Rampager, and use the Tech Marine's ability to buff up the Storm Raven. My hope here is that the buffed Oath of Moment would allow the Storm Raven to take down the Knight turn 1. So I moved it as far as I could to get into range and dropped off the cargo, a Brutalis Dreadnought, and 3 Melter Assault Centurions. Centurions I dropped to grab this objective so that Steve had to come and get it back. The Brutalis was there as backup, but if the Storm Raven didn't manage to get the kill. The other Assault Centurions move up a bit to get into the ruin and position for a countercharge if any Knights come too close. Bikes move around a bit and probably do some actions I can't quite remember. And my Devastated Centurions just stay where they are, with a lovely line of sight shot to the Abominant. Devastated Centurions reroll 1s innately due to their data card rule, and with a Vanguard Spearhead stratagem, I can get them hitting on 2s. So Oath of Moment isn't really that necessary here. Unfortunately, I've already blundered twice. I didn't move the Storm Raven correctly. I didn't measure it properly to check if I could actually get all my guns into the Rampager, so it's actually just out of range with the melters. The Disembarked Brutalis was also not well positioned, and so I had to just take pop shot into a dog that wasn't oathed and was now vulnerable to a countercharge from the Rampager. Because of the mission rule that we had, the Rampager also got benefits of cover, which meant that Steve didn't choose to use rotate ion shields. I know the Chaos version is called Ruinous Bulwark or something like that, but we're just so used to calling it rotate by this point that we never even bother calling it Ruinous Bulwark. Neither does anyone else. He figured that with the firepower I had, his 5+ invuln would only really kick in with the las cannon shot, and the missiles would be on 4+ anyway, so rotate would be useless. Instead, he was smart and used it on his Abominant against the Devastator Centurions, which I had buffed up with Strike from the Shadows as mentioned. This meant that instead of what I thought might have been 2 knights killed, instead I only managed to get 8 wounds through on the Abominant, and the Rampager was left with 3 wounds. Had my Melter been in range, I reckon that would have been a kill, but now I had a Storm Raven and Brutalis open in front of what I didn't realize was a very scary melee threat in the Rampager. A War Dog who could just waltz up and down smash my Incursors and take this objective, and an Abominant that will be eating my Blade Guard for breakfast. Hindsight is 2020, so I'd love to say that this was all planned for what comes next. It wasn't, but I'd love to say it so I can feel smart and maybe feel a little bit good about myself for once. I still get a bit orcish, let's say, and once again, I've overextended turn 1. I have an entire video specifically about making this same mistake over and over, and here I am doing it again. The only time that I really have a good plan is when I'm transporting my minis using my Mag Case 2.0 from Tabletop Stronghold. Holy shit, how do I keep getting away with these terrible segues into the sponsor tie?
Tabletop. Cases and terrain. John, get MDF. Look at the adjustable trays. Look at them. Winter sale. Winter sale. Go now. Push your picture here. 30% off. Buy it.
Thank you very much, Tabletop Stronghold, for sponsoring. Go to tabletopstronghold.com right now to get yourself an MDF case or MDF terrain at tabletopstronghold.com. Links in the description. But I don't want to buy... Steve's first turn went quite well for him, but he made one key mistake that would prove to be a disaster. He moved the Abominant and Rampager as expected, with the War Dogs getting involved as well to try and do some damage to the Melter Centurions and take him off that objective. He also moved his double battle cannon Despoiler up just a smidge to get onto this objective and stepped into this ruin to draw a bead on the Devastator Centurions. Historically, this unit has been my kryptonite. In the Crusade we played, he gave it a relic, meaning it had Lone Operative, and it also had massively buffed autocannons, making it an absolutely horrific monster. Even in our normal games, this guy pumps out an absurd amount of shots, and Steve always seems to roll really well with it. Within 36 inches, which is not that hard, this absolute unit pumps out 4d6 plus 12 shots at strength 10 and 3 damage. It is only -1 AP, so with the Vanguard Spearhead detachment rule, I have cover and -1 to hit. But if you were paying attention earlier, which you definitely were because you're a cool person like that, you'll remember that I mentioned my 2+ save luck is terrible. So normally this Despoiler takes out a lot of my Centurions, even just my entire Storm Raven, which completely cripples my army. And as much as the Strike Bomb is fantastic, it doesn't do that much against a big knight. However, when we came to shooting, he decided to fire the Despoiler last. This made sense, because he had line of sight on a few targets, and using his other units first allowed him to make the best choice in where some of those auxiliary guns the Despoiler had would be best placed. Normally, we allow takebacks fairly liberally because we're friends and want to have a fun game. The rule of thumb we use is that if the game state hasn't really changed when you realize the mistake, you can fix it. I was lucky that Steve didn't choose to fire the Despoiler first, because it turns out he was actually just over 36 inches away. Due to us trying to play fairly quickly for tournament practice, Steve had mismeasured the distance without me noticing, because I was thinking about something else whilst he was doing his movement, so he wasn't actually in rapid fire range for his big guns. Had he chosen this first, I think we would both been fine with him readjusting his movement phase to account for this, but it would have required the use of a stratagem, Knights of Shade, which Steve calls Terror Shades every time because I guess it sounds cooler, but it was confusing when looking up the strat for this video to get the rule correct to display on screen. Also, Terror Shades with a silent P like Pterodactyl is a choice, GW, but I guess it does look a bit cooler. No idea why though. Sorry, this was a weird tangent. Subscribe. Even more lucky is that distance was off by less than 4 inches, which meant that my 36-inch missiles from my Devastator Destroyers would be in range on my turn with a single move. The situations of my good fortune just keep stacking. Those terrifying 4d6 plus 12 shots became a rather pitiful 2d6 plus 6, and with a poor roll, 9 shots hitting on 4s is far less scary. I took no damage. Less fortunate was the loss of my entire Blade Guard squad and the Judicia in a combination of shooting and melee. The one good move I did make here is using the calculated feint stratagem on the Blade Guard. I didn't move that far away, but it meant that when he tried to charge my Blade Guard with a War Dog into the ruined wall, I was able to negate that and force the Abominant to charge closer to my lines for an easier countercharge. I didn't plan that as much as, again, I'd love to claim that I did. I forgot that he could have just charged the wall with his War Dog. It had been a while since we played last, and I was rusty, and stupid. But Vanguard Spearhead is just so good for stuff like this, and it just adds to the list of circumstances that put us into the golden game state. The Rampager charged into Pro Brutalis and absolutely obliterated it. A complete one-shot. And then my Brutalis goes and explodes because I finally rolled a fucking 6, which killed a model in my Melter Assault Centurions, killed the final Incursor who managed to stay alive in melee against a War Dog, and a little bit of damage to the Storm Raven. And despite the possibility of potentially killing the Rampager with that explosion, I only did 1 damage, leaving it with 2 health left. You might be yelling at the screen or yelling in the comments that Overwatch would have been so worth it to take out the Rampager, and I agree. I thought about Overwatching and took a while to really consider the best unit to use it on, except we then remembered that the mission rule we drew was Fog of War, meaning we cannot use core stratagems in the first battle round. I ended up deciding to save my command points and not use Overwatch, which was good, because if I had chosen to Overwatch, that'd be called cheating. Quite a big blow in that first battle round. My overextension has inevitably cost me once again. The Storm Raven, as always, will not be long for this world, and whilst I have a lot of fast-moving units and stuff to come down from Deep Strike, they aren't going to really be able to handle any knights. As always, I'll slowly get my army whittled down, and Steve's army will remain fully operational, with fast war dogs able to swap the board, doing objectives and melterizing my army. Battle round 2 started, and I drew my secondary cards. And what I got recontextualized every small decision and the entire game state. Rablon. Wait, no, sorry, wrong game and wrong insanity. Bring it down. The secondary mission deck has 18 different cards, and most of the time you draw 2 per turn. I'd drawn 2 already in round 1, either scored or discarded them, so I had 2 more draws, meaning that this was an unlikely card to draw. Not any less likely than any other card, but I think this is the maths on what the chances are. I don't know, I'm not a statistic. Most secondary cards generally score between 2 and 6 victory points, depending on how well or how much of the objectives you satisfy or how many actions you manage to complete. Sometimes there's a cap to these points. For example, no prisoners. While this card is active, you score 2 VP each time you kill an enemy unit, up to 5 VP. So killing 3 units maxes this out. There's also a limitation on some cards with the wording. Assassination, for example, states that you get 5 VP for destroying 1 or more character models. So whether you killed 1 character or you were playing against Thousand Suns and killed 33, you only score 5 victory points. As far as we could tell, and damn did we try and find the answer to check this, because oh boy, Bring It Down does not have a cap. Let's read this secondary. Each time an enemy monster or vehicle unit is destroyed, you get 2 victory points. You get an additional 2 victory points if that unit has a starting wounds characteristic of 15 plus, and an additional 2 VP on top of that if it has more than 20. So a knight with a starting strength of 22 wounds is worth 6 VP, which is the upper limit of most cards. But there's no cap. You can see what's happened here, right? Through blunders, luck, and circumstance, I now have a board state that has a big knight on 2 wounds near a fully stocked Storm Raven, which is not in melee, a 14 wound big knight near 3 Assault Centurions, which tears vehicles to shreds in melee, and a fully healthy big knight that has managed to move just in range of a fully operational Devastator Centurion squad that can fire everything. I was fairly confident in being able to destroy the 2 wounded knights. Maybe the Abominant would live, but I think I have a decent chance of it. The 2 health Rampager would definitely die. It's just a question of how much of the Storm Raven I would need. I wanted to make sure that if the Devastators couldn't quite take out the Despoiler, the Storm Raven could fire a few things at it to finish it off. This is a good time to talk about how broken the new Oath of Moment is, especially with the way I've created this wonderful Screaming Raven list. Oath of Moment allows your army to reroll all hit rolls against a single enemy unit that you allocate. This is quite strong. Full rerolls are one of the better buffs in the game, but it's only against 1 unit, unless you're a coward and play Ultramarines and use Roboto Gulliman. However, the new Oath of Moment also allows you to add 1 to the wound roll against the Oath target. If you don't have any units from the Divergent Chapters, yada yada yada, we don't care about that bit. I might be wrong on this, but my gut feeling is that +1 to wound is the strongest buff in the entire game. In 10th edition, the roll you need to make to wound an enemy is based on a fairly simple calculation. If the strength of the attack is equal to the toughness of the target, you need a 4+. If strength is greater, you need a 3+. If strength is double or more, you need a 2+. And reversely, strength is less than toughness is 5+, strength is half or less is 6+. Let's take a few examples to see how crazy this can get. Devastator Centurions have a las cannon. Don't know why I said it like that. That sounded kind of weird. Devastator Centurions have a las cannon, which is strength 12. So against a knight is wounding on 4s. With Oath of Moment, that wounds on 3s now, which is the equivalent of the las cannon being at least strength 13. There's a few things that might give +1 strength to range, which would have been the same thing here, but this is still a fairly big shift from a 50% chance to a 66% chance of beat me.
6 2/3%.
They also have Centurion missiles, which are strength 9, so wounding on 5s. However, with +1 to wound, that becomes the equivalent of at least strength 12. That's 3 extra strength on the weapon. Then you look at something like the Storm Raven, and let's say their hurricane bolters. In half range with rapid fire, these are 24 shots, but normally wounding on 6s. Now they wound on 5s. Those strength 4 weapons are now suddenly the equivalent of strength 7, going from a 16.66 recurring chance to a 33% chance of winning.
The numbers don't lie!
Yes, these examples are very particular and cherry-picked to this situation against specifically big knights, but I'm sure you can extrapolate that to a lot of other situations. For my list specifically, I have a lot, and I mean a lot, of twin-linked weapons, which allows you to re-roll the wound roll. So not only are these shots full re-rolls to hit and +1 to wound, they also are full wound re-rolls in most cases. Holy shit, that's good! This brings us nicely back to the actual task at hand, killing this Despoiler. 6 Devastator Centurions, buffed with Strike from the Shadows against an Oath-Momented Knight with Rotate. That is 6 las cannon shots, hitting on 2s, re-rolling all of those hits, wounding on 3s, re-rolling all of those wounds, damage d6 +1, AP -4, but that's inconsequential because of the 4-up invuln save, and an additional 63 missile shots. There's a very high likelihood of all 6 of the las cannon shots getting into the invuln save, even before having to worry about the missiles, which is exactly what happened. Averages say 3 get through on the 4-up invuln, but we all know that this can go either way, and we've had that happen. Steve fails 4 saves. My damage rolls high. I don't even need the missiles. The other 2 knights went down as well. 3 big knights in the list, and all 3 being dead by turn 2 is a huge problem, but not insurmountable due to the amount of damage the war dogs can kick out. Those big boy melters absolutely wreck me, and I've seen before that taking the big knights out doesn't necessarily mean Steve is out the game. What is insurmountable is the additional 18 victory points I just got from 1 card, and 22 points total from my secondaries for the round. Had I moved my Stormraven properly, I might be in the same situation with 3 knights dead by turn 2, but only 12 victory points, or maybe even just 6, which would have been fine, but the combination of half the army being dead and now a massive victory point deficit meant that this game was effectively over. So many things had to happen to stack up for that absolutely perfect turn. I've never had, and probably never will, have such a perfect turn again. Potentially, I would have still won this game had things been different. You can never know. So many decisions in a game of 40k are made off the back of the outcomes from previous turns. Had I killed the Rampage at turn 1, would Steve have moved a Despoiler elsewhere? So many things could have been different, but on that day, in that game, I got very, very lucky. The next day, I played another game against my friend Chris and his Grey Knights and completely fucking stomped him because teleporting Devastation Centurions are bonkers. No luck needed, bitches. I was right. Centurions are the best. Woo! Thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good YouTube stuff, and join all of these wonderful Centurion enjoyers by becoming a member or Patreon, so you can gain access to my guide on how to completely decimate your opponent's 6 Rogel Dawn list by throwing a frigid.